not financial advice. I'm recording my thoughts about Alphabet or Google stock. The stock is currently trading at about $109 with a market cap of about $1.4 trillion. In the past 1 year, the stock is down about 15%, and that's a significant drop. And the main reason for this drop is their net income reduced by $15 billion. The year prior to that, they made $75 billion net income, and in the last year, they only made about $60 billion net income. So that's a huge drop in net income, and that's one reason why the stock has dropped. And secondly, there is ChatGPT. And a lot of folks are thinking that ChatGPT will be a threat to the Google search business. So I'm going to consider that as well in today's evaluation. I'm going to show two cases. One case with search business growth as 0% for the next 5 years. In other words, the search business growth has stalled. And second case, I'm going to show 5% growth rate for the next 5 years, which I think is conservative. Before we go into the stock evaluation, I'm going to discuss the business model as well as finances. To do a proper evaluation of Alphabet, we need to look at their business model in which different sub-businesses are contributing to the overall revenue. On the screen, you can focus on the circle. In that, we can see dark navy blue color. That's about $162 billion. That is Google's search and other business. Google search and other contributes to about 57% of the entire revenue. The entire revenue is in the order of $280 billion. Out of that, $160 billion is just from the Google search and other. Now let's look at the other pieces. We can see Google network members, which is contributing to $32.8 billion. That is in the light blue color. And when I say Google network members, that is advertising revenues generated from the ads served on Google's advertising platforms like AdSense, AdMob, and Google Ad Manager. So that business is generating $32.8 billion, and that's about 11%, right? And we all know YouTube. YouTube is generating about $30 billion of revenue, and that contributes to about 10.4%. Then there is Google Other. That's also another 10%. And Google Other includes Google Play Store, hardware, and YouTube paid members. As you can see, there is Google Other, but there is another other in the Google Search and Other. So it's important to distinguish both. And lastly, they have Google Cloud. That's contributing to about 10% again, $26 billion of revenue. And there's a tiny bit of other bets. I'm just going to ignore that. The other bets include a number of companies like Waymo, Verily, Nest, Access Capital, there's Calico. For now, I'm going to ignore them because they're loss-making businesses and their revenue contribution is also about 1%. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to ignore that the other bets exist. So in summary, we have search business contributing to 60% of the revenue almost. And we have 4 different pieces: YouTube, Google Other, Google Cloud, and Google network members contributing 10% each, 10, 10, 10, 10, and then we have 60% coming from the search business. With the advent of ChatGPT, there will be some disruption to the Google search business, which is about 60% of their revenue, and the rest of the 4 sub-businesses, which contribute to 10% each of the total revenue, they should see much less disruption. So for the purpose of the stock evaluation, I'm going to assume that this $162 billion is going to get affected by ChatGPT, and rest of the businesses are not affected. Let's look at these individual business growth rates in the past few years. As you can see on my screen, the large bar, the tallest bar, that's the Google search and other. You can see that number is $149 billion in 2021. And in 2022, that's about $162 billion. That's almost 8 to 9% growth rate. And when we look into the YouTube ads, that's the navy blue color bar. And in 2021, that's about 28 billion. But in 2022, that's about 29 billion. That's like less than single digit growth. But what you need to know is in 2020, it was only at 19 billion. So it grew by 40% from 2020 to 2021, but from 2021 to 2022 it was only single digit. So when I look at the average growth, that's about 20%. So that's the case for YouTube. And there is Google Network, Google Other. And when we look at Google Cloud, they made about $8.9 billion in 2019, and in 2022 they tripled their revenue to about $26 billion. So the growth in cloud is much faster. Search is growing in the single digits. YouTube, as I said before, it grew substantially in 1 year, 40%, and in the recent year it only grew single digits, so I'm going to take an average. So for the purpose of this evaluation, I'm going to consider Google Search as one entity, YouTube Ads, Google Network, and Google Other. All three are very similar businesses, so I'm going to consider them as one entity. Google Cloud is another entity. So we have three different entities. I'm going to assign growth rates, net profit margins, and multiples for them separately because it makes sense. Because when sub-businesses have different growth rates and different profit margins, they deserve different multiples. Now let's move to financials. I'm going to start with the cash position. Google has about $113 billion of cash and cash equivalents. So what do they do with this money? They can acquire another company, right? But the problem is Google is so big, and anything that they want to acquire will come under antitrust law scrutiny. So they're unable to acquire anything. The best thing that they can do is to buy back stock, which is exactly what they're doing. By the end of 2021, they had 13.45 billion outstanding shares, and by the end of 2022, they only had 12.94 billion outstanding shares. That's a 4% reduction in the outstanding number of shares, which means that Google is buying back those shares. The income statement now for 2022, I put a navy blue box. The revenue for 2022 is about $282 billion, but the total costs and expenses are about $207 billion. If you just move to the left, past year, it was at 178 billion, and all of a sudden they spent 30 billion more. And that's because they hired a lot of people and their operating expenses went up significantly. So they're now focusing on cost cutting. So this number has to improve next year. And the net income, as I said before, is about $60 billion, and it's down from 76 billion the year before, almost $15 billion of reduction in the net income, which spooked the investors, right? Now let's move to the interesting part, which is the evaluation. As I said before, I'm going to evaluate Google as three different businesses. The first one is the search business. In 2022, they made about $162 billion of revenue, and as you can see, I estimated 0% growth for the next 5 years. Search business itself is growing in about 10% plus rate, but I'm assuming that ChatGPT will disrupt Google search significantly, and that's going to stall the growth for Google search for the next 5 years. So in this case, the 2027 revenue will be exactly same as 2022, $162 billion. And we do know that net profit margin is about 25%. So I assigned a multiple of 17.5 on their $40 billion of net income. And with that, the search business would be worth $709 billion. And with respect to number of outstanding shares, as I said before, they have 12.94 billion outstanding shares in 2022. And Google is going to generate a lot of cash flow in the next 5 years. And they cannot just go out and buy any business because the antitrust laws do not allow for that, because Google is too big. The only thing that they can do is to buy back shares, which they will do in my opinion. So I'm assuming 4% buyback each year, which would get their number of outstanding shares to about 10.553 billion in 2027. So that's going to contribute $67 stock price in 2027 just for the search business. So now let's move on to the three entities: Google Network, YouTube, and Google Other. These three are about 30% of Google's revenue. So I added these three together. They're together making about $100 billion of revenue in 2022. All of them are growing at a varied pace. When I take an average, they're coming down to about 15% to 20%. So with 10% revenue growth rate in the next 5 years, which I think is conservative, they'll make about $161 billion of revenue. With 25% net profit margin, they'll make $40 billion of net income. And I assign the multiple of 20 because they're growing faster. That's going to result in an equivalent of $76 just for these three business segments: Google Network, YouTube, and Google Other. Now let's move on to the cloud. Cloud, as we know, is growing at a very rapid pace. As I said before, in the past 3 years, they tripled their revenue from 8 billion to 26 billion. And I'm assuming a growth rate of 15%, which is extremely conservative in my opinion. With that, they can make about $52 billion of revenue in 2027 for the cloud business. And I'm only assuming a net profit margin of 20% because Google has to compete with AWS and Microsoft Azure, which are far ahead of Google. So therefore, they have to compromise on their margins. So I'm assuming Google Cloud would be profitable in 2027. With that, the stock price for the cloud business would be about $17, just $17 for the cloud business. So we have valued search business at $67, network, YouTube, and Google Other as $76, and cloud business is only worth $17. And now I have another piece, which is the cash. They have $113 billion of cash left, right? And as Google stockholders, we all own that cash. So that $113 billion, when I divide with the 10.553 billion outstanding shares, I will get $11. So when I add all these together, I'm going to show one screenshot now. And on the top, I'm showing the addition of all these four numbers: $67 for search, $76 for network, YouTube, other, Google Cloud is $17, and the cash is equal to $11. In 2027, the price would be about $172. Currently, it's at $109, right? So that's almost 60% gain in 5 years when we assume that the Google search business is going to stall. And that's not bad. That's going to beat the index for sure. Now let me show the great execution case. And I don't want to waste your time by discussing all these numbers. I'm going to put this screenshot. And the only thing I want to point out that I assumed 5% growth rate for the search business. Remember, in the previous year, they grew at double digit, and the search business itself is growing in double digits, but I still assumed 5% growth rate for the search business. And I modified the growth rates for the rest of the businesses as well, which reflect great execution. When I add these numbers, it comes down to $250. Currently it's at $109, right? So that's almost 2.3, 2.4x, which is an excellent gain for 5 years out. In conclusion, for the base case, in which I'm assuming the search business is going to stall for the next 5 years, the price estimation is about $172. And in the great execution case, where the search business is going to grow at 5% or more, the stock price would be about $250. In the past 1.5 years, I've been saying Google is a buy at $100 or below, and I'm going to stick to that claim. I'm going to continue buying Google stock as long as it stays below $100.